very close by to the renowned volcano, which is no longer active, of Rocca Monfina. Many of you have been around that volcano. We've been to Porto di Mal, different places. That we're talking about the same volcano, just that we're on the other side. And doesn't right now where we are, it doesn't give us the impression of being on a volcano, because what happened throughout the thousands of years has been like a movement of the mountain that went down. So it doesn't give us the impression that we're on the top of a mountain, but we are in the area of the volcano of Rocca Monfina. Now, what about this village? This village now has only a few people. Quante persone ci stanno oggi qua? 20 people live in this little village. It's called Foresta, which means woods. It's part of that little town we came through, which was called Tora. Tora e Piccili. Piccili è un'altra cosa.
No, Piccili è un altro abitato, Tora.
Tora,
Tore.
The little village we went through is called Tora, and it used to be a castle at one point. Throughout the history, a lot of these little towns had a wall around it. So they were like fortified towns in the Middle Ages, basically. And this was just a little village that developed around this church. This building here is a church, which was here already in the 14th century. So now we have an idea where we are in the world right now, how we are positioned to the volcano of Rocca. Several thousands of years until maybe the mid-1800s, so when the Bourbonic kingdom was around. What happened in this little village is that there were very, very heavy rains. So heavy that it really devastated a lot of the little towns around. So there were many, many heavy rains, and a lot of mud was moved all over the place, a lot of devastation. What happened at that time, a lot of the terrain was washed off the lava rock, which was underneath, and suddenly appeared these footprints on the lava. So back then, the culture was different than people, you know, we're talking about 100 and 200 years ago, more or less. And people believed, who could ever walk on lava? Only the devil could do that. That's why they've been called the devil's footprints. And people really believed that back then, because there was no notion of the volcano, what it did. Even nowadays, you talk to some of the old people, they didn't have an idea that was a volcano. It's just a mountain. I mean, I thought it was just a mountain until I started growing up and I started learning about it. That's all it looks like. It doesn't look like, it's not an active volcano anymore. So a lot of people figured, hey, that could only have been the devil. That's why it's called Ciampate, which means footprints. Ciampate del Diavolo, footprints of the devil.
Archeologo specialista soltanto in orme fossili.
Sì. But only in the year 2000, when some scholars were studying the castle, the history about the buildings around here, as they were doing that, they got to know about this legend about the devil footprints, and said, you know, let's go and check it out. And they went down this slope where we're going to go to, and they looked at these footprints. They figured this must be something different, and they went back and started reading about it. Got others and people who are studied this subject from all around the world came to this little village in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I wouldn't, you and me would have never came here. We wouldn't have known about this village of 20 people because if it wasn't for this. So you had TV troops from all around the world, BBC, all around the world. If you go on Google and Google it out, you'll see it. You had studies from all around the world come to see it, see the footprints. And now she's going to introduce us to some of the volcanic activities, so that makes us understand better how those footprints remain there. And then we'll go more and more into it, and then we'll go. We're talking about a volcano. For those of you who already looked at the mountain of Rocca Monfina, as I said earlier, it may look more as a mountain, because at one point it all exploded. But before it exploded, the height of the volcano was 2,000 meters, which is pretty high, you know. So the activity of the volcano can be divided in 3 phases. Now we're looking at the first phase, which is the yellow, okay, and that's the phase that gives the shape of a typical volcano, okay, and that was formed between the years 650,000 years ago and 450,000 years ago. That's when that shape was there, okay? Yeah, and it was up to 2,000 meters high, which is pretty high. L'Etna quanto è alto?
L'Etna è più alto, supera i 3.000.
Etna is more than 3,000, this was 2,000. Remember, Rocca Monfina, along with the Vesuvius and Etna, were among the most biggest volcanoes in Italy. This is not active, those two are still active.
Quindi
very high, it was putting a lot of pressure on the rest of the mountain. So what happened at one point in time, it kind of pushed down the rest of the mountain. Now we are right here, okay, so what happened throughout time, this kind of collapsed and made everything kind of slide down. Okay. So basically we looked at the first phase when there was the eruption and the creation of this shape of the volcano, which was very, very heavy. So at one point that kind of moved out. Then the second phase is all this blue area here is when the volcanic activity changes. It's no longer eruption, but there's explosions with all these gases and lava exploding all over the place. And that's when
non lava, perché sono flussi piroclastici, sono soltanto ceneri ardenti misti ash.
It was burning ash, not lava, and so basically there was an explosion with all this burning ash and
magma solidificato.
And a creation of this so-called magma, which was in the because of the chemical composition, basically it was getting solid. Okay. In that phase, as it was getting solid on the outside, the first human beings were able to walk on it without getting burned, but they would leave their prints because it wasn't solid yet, but it was about to get solid. Later on, there was other explosions which covered it up and protected those footprints. Okay, this went on for some time. Basically, we could age the footprints going back 350,000 years ago, more or less. Okay?
Sì, le datazioni, diciamo.
Okay, now she went very much in detail about all the technicalities and the scientific methods that were used to measure and date back when those footprints were made. I'm not going to translate it because it will be totally lost in translation. But anyway, they used several scientific methods to kind of come up with a more or less date when those footprints were kind of put in place. It represents the third and last ultimate eruption when basically the activity of the volcano stopped, and that goes back 53,000 years ago. So I mean, it's a long time ago. It's a long time ago. That's why for many years people lost the perception that this was a volcano. Okay. Although for those who've been coming around this area, you all know of some of the thermal water in Suya, all that stuff, and it's all a result of the thermal activity that still is. The volcanic activity which still is going on underground years ago. But you can see the tower, which is a Norman tower of the castle, and you can see the remnants of the wall. It doesn't look like a castle right now because it's all been transformed, like many Italian towns, into houses. The footprints were probably were formed not when the eruption was going on. Maybe it was done weeks and weeks later, and maybe the human beings that passed there weren't even living here. They were like hunters who would do up to 50-70 kilometers per day going out there. They were nomads moving from one place to another. So and they don't know exactly how much time after the eruption or the explosion they were actually passing by.
Okay.
It's very hard to really focus down and be precise. Probably as scientists and scholars keep studying and looking into stuff, maybe the story will be different 10 years from now as they discover more. Up to 4 years ago, this was the site with the most antique, oldest footprints of the human beings, of the erectus, which is when the human beings were standing up and weren't kind of, but that went away 4 years ago because they found another place in Africa which goes back 700,000 years ago. But still, this place remains very important because it's the only place where the footprints are not on a plain area but are on a slope, on a mountain. And as we go, because of the lava, because of all that activity, the volcanic activity, it gives us a whole bunch of information more than other places. Plus, quante piste ci sono? Hai detto 6 piste?
Allora, sì, 6 piste.
6 piste, because they have 6 trails here, and there's one major trail, main trail, which people been going on there all the time. That means it was like a passageway for a lot of people. So you see footprints on top of others.
La via del tempo.
100
orme.
100 orme, just over 100 footprints.
Okay. Loro scendevano, questo glielo devi chiarire perché io adesso la ripercorrerò al contrario, quindi poi vanno tutti in confusione, dicono ma scendevano o salivano? Loro scendevano.
Stop for a moment where she is right now because the footprint isn't really deep, and she was thinking, hey, which is the best route for me to go down there without rolling down? Zigzag, right?
Zigzag, quindi questo ci dice che avevano delle capacità.
The human beings back then were perfectly standing up. So as they were crossing the legs, you know, putting one leg in front of another, they were able to stand up and be, you know, not falling off. If they were more like monkeys, you know, they would have been kind of walking differently like she was showing us. So it means that the type of human being that was here back then was able to stand up. We're looking at also different phases throughout time where the human beings were changing the way they were standing up and the way they looked.
Anche perché, guardate.
She's going to put some water in that little footprint.
Voi sapete tutti, no? Che l'acqua si accumula nelle cavità. E qui dove si accumula l'acqua? Si accumula nella zona del tallone.
They had was very similar to what we have right now. So, and they were able to basically stand up without anything like that. Basically, that's what the formation, different bones that we have under the feet were not like the monkey kind of human being, but was more like what we are right now. The footprint's so large. Were they giants? No. The footprint is just a regular foot. It's just that, since, remember, this was mud. It's kind of moving. So as they put the foot in there, the foot would move and make a bigger hole. Okay?
Parte del fianco, una mano in questo punto e ci lascia appunto questa lunga scivolata che potete vedere. E poi
Watch out for those trees.